was instructing snowboarding, and we just kind of ran into each other at church one night, and I thought he was crazy. And he just kept showing up to things I was doing, and the next thing I knew, we were dating.
Hello and welcome to the Brothers and Sisters Like These podcasts. I'm your host, Brother Emiliano. Today, our guest is Gold Star wife Michelle Black. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's an honor and a privilege to have you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, my husband, I was married to a Green Beret. We were married about 12 years. He was killed in Niger, Africa, when his Green Beret team was ambushed by ISIS, and him and three of his teammates were killed that day. It was October 4th, 2017. So I'm known because in the aftermath, the team was blamed, and I wrote a book on the entire subject.
And that book called Sacrifice, I've had the honor to read when it first came out, because many of us military veterans have the same type of trauma of losing a loved one or friends. And I was not fully aware of what you went through as a surviving spouse. And that book really captivated me. And so this has been years in the making for me to get an opportunity to speak to you, because it's such a riveting explanation of an initial trauma of what caused the death of your husband, but also the political fallout afterwards and the ramifications, and then the post-traumatic growth, which is what you've gone through, which the book, is my understanding, has helped you with that post-traumatic growth, because it's been therapeutic to write. And that's where we come in as a writing group and an arts group. And so tell us a little bit about the process of the actual book itself and what motivated you to write it, and how it came about.
So, as I mentioned, the team was sort of blamed when my husband's team came back from Africa. Essentially, the military ran an investigation, and they blamed the team members for being ambushed, despite the fact that they didn't send themselves on the mission. And they weren't even responsible for all the CONOPS, or concept of operations reports, that were filed to push um, that action forward. Yeah, that mission forward. And so, in the aftermath, when they came back and it became clear that we weren't getting a full picture of what happened, that the officers who called for that mission and pushed them ahead weren't being held accountable, but that instead everything was being pushed down to the men on the team. For me, that was hard, because um, I knew that if Brian had survived, he would have been the person, one of the guys being blamed. And what they were saying didn't fit. They were saying that the team went rogue, acted like cowboys, misled those highest up the chain to chase after a terrorist, which, I mean, really any unit wouldn't do that, an entire unit, let alone a Green Beret unit who's trained an extra, 3 to 5 years. So when that happened, there were two things. I was really upset that the men on the team were going to be blamed, punished, and lose their careers over something that they couldn't have prevented. And number two, that the military thought they could just lie to the families after saying they had run a full scale investigation, just lie to us about what happened in order just to save the higher level officers and punish those lowest down the chain. All of that was the reason behind me writing the book. Um, yeah, so that's what kind of kicked it off. So.
And so you found that part of the writing, and what we find is that when we talk about something, it's difficult to talk about certain things. It's easier to write because we feel a little bit removed from it, and we're acting like a narrative and narrating the story. And what it does is, instead of focusing just on one event, it kind of gives the totality, and it allows us time to kind of metabolize the experience. And it doesn't make it go away, but it makes it a lot more manageable. You going through that process, I know it can be very stressful when you're talking about editing in a book and all that, but did you feel that that actual physical writing process did allow you to better uh, break down your emotions and give yourself time to actually heal versus not writing?
I think that's a little more complex to answer because I had a time crunch. Um, I felt the need to get something written and picked up by an agency within, a year or two after Brian's death. So I was still actively grieving when I started. So he was killed in October, and it was May when I started collecting so about 8 months later when I started collecting my interviews and doing all my writing. And it helped, if anything, it helped me kind of piece things together and keep track and distract a little bit more later down the road. So after the book came out, once I started going on podcasts or talking to people, I also found that um, that was when I was able to more um, relax and process the grief a little more. And I had written it down, but a lot of times when I was writing certain pieces, that's when I realized, oh, this is where all the pain is. Like when I'm writing about my kids, or I'm writing about me and Brian, but there was still a lot of that anger that comes with loss. And so as I'm writing about, what happened to the guys, or the lies that were told to us, that anger was very visceral. And I think that's why the book became so um, emotionally charged, where people can really, when they're reading it, they feel it. It's because it was all still very there at the forefront as I was writing. So after stepping out, and now, if I write a speech, or I go back and I write a little bit more about that time, I am able to process it differently, and it does help. And speaking about it helps.
Yeah, I can understand you were, I imagine, psychologically on a time crunch in the sense that this was still fresh in the minds of the American people. And so I think you had a window of time that you knew you had to be able to put out this story of what really happened within a shorter time versus a longer time, just because the narrative would have been lost. So that's why I was saying before, I can imagine it was incredibly stressful as a process of book writing. But as you've alluded, there is a way to do post traumatic growth afterwards through different, we promote writing, but we're very great friends with equine therapy, agrotherapy, all types of group sessions. And what we found out is that the specific more than the specific field that you choose, what's important is being together. It's that connectivity. So the community, it's having a safe place where you don't feel judged, where you can say what you need to say amongst people that understand and can appreciate your pain, also because they've been there. Maybe not exactly what each of us have been through, but they understand what service and sacrifice means. And so I think that's why it's so important for our members to engage in someone like you, who is not the veteran itself, but has done so much to advocate, because we try to advocate for our own veterans and ourselves. And that's what, you did. And I simply cannot, and I've been doing this for a while, I cannot remember anybody that's been so impactful in terms of expressing, in recent times, in modern times, definitely during the GWAT, kind of some of the emotional struggles that a lot of us went through. And, I just have to say on a personal note, just how I want you to know that our community is just so proud and impressed that you've done that. It's such an honor to think that if one of us were to die, to have our spouse just take the lead and do it so well. It really means a lot to us, and I hope you people have let you know that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that means a lot. I think it was something that unless I'd lived through, I wouldn't have ever understood what men coming back from war, especially after losing friends, had gone through. I think if Brian had survived, I would have never fully understood what he was going through on the other side. But being there and recognizing as the men came home, recognizing that grief and that pain, and that they clearly felt it was their duty to apologize to me for not bringing Brian home. I think that blew my mind because in my mind, I looked at that and I was like, they're going through the same level of pain and grief as I am. They spend 6 months a year with him in, a box in the desert living. And then they train for 3 months. So really, I had him 3 months out of the year. They had him for 9. And after a few years, I was like, they're just as impacted by this, as I am. And so for them to say sorry to me, I wasn't okay with. And I didn't, I think the biggest struggle oftentimes is me just trying to get it through their heads that they don't need to have survivor's guilt. I know that it's kind of a hard thing to fix, but there's just no reason for it because I know that if they knew Brian was going to try and give his life to get them out of there, they'd have run back and done the same thing for him. And so for me, I was like, well, Brian was one of the oldest guys out there, and these guys were all younger than him. So it made more sense. Like, okay, he's had his time, he's had his family. Now he bought you guys more time to be with your family. And I can handle this. You might have a different situation at home where they can't handle this. So survivor's guilt to me at that point, I didn't want them to feel that.
That's extremely graceful for you, and I'll say as someone who deals with survivor's guilt, especially if I've had 3 deaths while I was overseas on 2 different missions close to the holidays. And it's always a very challenging time for me and many of my GWAT and Vietnam era Panama friends. So you're showing an incredible amount of grace. I guess that just goes to your personality and your character. And it's very helpful as a veteran to hear those kinds of words because we're struggling with our own post-traumatic growth and we're trying to help others as well. But your grace is very special and very appreciated. So thank you for those words.
Thank you. But I mean, I really mean them. I really wish I could make everybody see it the way I do, and I think that's why it's so important for Gold Star families to build a relationship, a positive relationship with the surviving men who come back, because you have to see them as human and also as who are the ones who are hurting as well. It's not all about your pain. And I think a lot of times the veterans' pain gets buried because, like our pain has to come first. That's my husband, my child. And yeah, it's incredibly painful, but that doesn't mean you don't have any pain.
That's a great perspective. And I always value surviving spouses, caregivers, Gold Star family members with those perspectives because even though we're right slap in the middle of it, we don't quite see it from that perspective. And it's so rewarding and helpful to hear it from that. So, could you give us just a quick kind of background, just a really hot wash about, how you guys met and the whole sequence to him getting a tab and what was that journey like? Just the ins and out.
So I'm from California. He was from Washington State. And after college, we both happened to go up to this little ski town in California called Mammoth Mountain. And I was instructing snowboarding. And we just kind of ran into each other at church one night. And I thought he was crazy. And he just kept showing up to things I was doing. And the next thing I knew, we were dating. And then we got engaged and got married and lived there for about, gosh, I don't know, 2 years. Started having kids, and the crash came of 2008, and he went, "What if I joined the military?" And I thought, whatever, as long as you're happy. And I'm trying to raise 2 crazy kids that were only like a year and a half apart, so we are just at that baby stage. So he went off and joined the army, and I kind of kicked everything off. So yeah.
And what did he initially join the Army as? Was he an 18 series or did he come in as a specific?
He came in as a 68 whiskey, so a medic, just kind of general medic. So he was assigned to a a combat support hospital, and we were stationed in Colorado Springs. So that was nice. Colorado is beautiful. That was probably my favorite station we ever went to. But he got bored after a year and started training to go to selection, which I didn't know what any of that was, but he'd always wanted to be a SEAL or something extreme. And I just thought, whatever. I grew up so far away from military. I didn't really know what any of that stuff was or meant. I knew it didn't mean higher pay. So I was like, well, does it really matter what you do? But he seemed excited. So I figured if that was, going to make him happy, then whatever. So, yeah.
And after what 18 series was he? Was he a Delta?
Yeah, he was an 18 Delta medical sergeant. So, and he started out as a junior medic, and then by the end, he was the lead medic on his team.
And that's a very intense and long and difficult, uh, the longest and most difficult courses of all the series that they have. So it's a very important role, especially when you're doing counterinsurgencies. As they're not just, say, Navy SEALs are like trauma medics and great at that, so are Rangers, but SEALs can go deliver a baby if they have to, pull a tooth if they have to, because they're doing more of the, hearts and minds counterinsurgency type of stuff. So it's really amazing capabilities. And how did he like that aspect of being a Delta versus maybe some other job? Was he happy about that, or?
Oh, he loved it. He wanted to go become a PA or a emergency room doctor afterwards because in their training, which he loved, because like you said, they have to be able to go and do anything from veterinary care to deliver babies, to pull a tooth, to do surgeries out in the field. So just to train for that, like he spent time doing rotations at a hospital in Richmond, Virginia. He worked in the burn victims unit. He worked on gunshot wound victims. And then he went up to, I believe it was Oklahoma, some remote Indian reservation, and he worked with uh, like horse veterinarians, and he did anywhere from vet work to working in their small little hospital delivering babies. And I mean, he was all about it. So he actually couldn't wait to get out so then he could go do something to, with the medical end. So yeah, he loved
And
it.
uh, your the experiences that team, that special forces team had in Africa, a lot of politicians weren't even aware. Even members on the committee were not aware that we had troops even stationed in that country, and were not really aware of the importance from a counterinsurgency and counterterrorism role that Africa played. And while I was involved with all the Afghanistan and Iraq stuff, as that started to slightly die down because of getting ISIS under control somewhat, it all shifted to Africa. And
Mhm.
so, what your husband's team was doing was fighting that influence, that foothold that they were getting. And, we knew about it, but the American people didn't, that it was Africa had become the new hotbed and was extremely important. And I don't know if, did you like know any of that about how important Africa was or what was going on, or did you just imagine this was just like rotational stuff that, special forces go and just help train local fighters and stuff?
So it was kind of a mix. And as far as the Congress thing, I know when everything happened, they claimed they didn't know. But they did have, what was it, a USASOC general who would brief them every year on what was happening on the continent of Africa and in the different countries like Nigeria. Um, that doesn't mean they were paying attention or there that day. So that's why most of them didn't know and could claim they didn't know. They
Good
just
point.
don't care enough to pay attention, to be honest. But yeah, no, I honestly stay at home mom with the kids, having a kid on the spectrum. I was so busy, I didn't really pay attention once Brian died. It's like I looked at it and it was obvious because as you're pushing people out of, Afghanistan and all of those regions, they're going to go, to a different area. So they're going to go into Syria, cross over into Africa, start to flood those areas. So when you're pushing ISIS and extremism out of one area, it doesn't, unless you've killed all of them, it doesn't disappear. They just move. So they were moving on to the continent of Africa. So, and you can see it now. I mean, a lot of those nations have fallen now completely to um, ISIS, and they're places where ISIS didn't really exist before. So,
Yeah, and I say that because I think it's important for the general public to understand that a lot of times there's things going on within the military that the common person who's a civilian doesn't know. Um, and that they can be very important things. And so, what your husband and their team and third special forces group was and is doing in Africa is extremely important because we're not in the Middle East right now in the same manner. And so, it's very very important that we try to mitigate as much as we can before these things are out of our control. And that's what your husband and the team was doing. And it's very unfortunate that we have to know that because of his sacrifice. But it's just one of those things that I want to make sure people understand that there's so many things that our military has done, and is doing right now that we don't necessarily see or understand, but it is on, the spouses and the families' burden and the soldiers' burden. So thank you for, letting us understand what his role was in the Africa and counterinsurgency areas.
absolutely. Well, and I'd also just like to point out that, what I get a lot is, why are we there? We shouldn't be there. And like you said, we're doing all of these things to mitigate other issues, but also we have these alliances with other countries, and Niger happened to be one of them. They invited us there and asked us to partner with them because they were fearing the fall of their country to the Islamic extremists, which has now happened because we did pull out. And they did not want that to happen, but they knew without us there that would happen. And, unfortunately, Americans began to make such a stink after this issue, not the families, but the US like citizen in general was so upset about what happened that we ended up pulling people out of there, and now, that nation has fallen. So then you have to question, well, was it worth all the lives lost in the country, all the money poured into it, or should we have stood by our partners? And that's a really good question.
And that's a great point because throughout history, we've seen Vietnam vets who have come home and have to watch the remaining of the war on TV while their friends are still over there. In the 5 years of active duty that I had, I spent more time overseas and at home than I did, overseas in training in combat than I did at home. And the time that I was at home, I was watching on TV, getting ready to redeploy, having you guys having to bring them up to speed. So it's such just an intense mental and physical arena to be in that it really, really takes a toll. And it's difficult for them to then see an aftermath like pulling out of Iraq or Afghanistan. It it's interesting because it cuts both ways. You don't want to see more suffering. You don't want to see more of us dying, but at the same time, we are trying to accomplish a mission. Maybe how or why we accomplish that mission is up for debate. No problem. But it's still like asks the question, like you said, that we all say, was it worth it, or why were we there? Or it's interesting that someone like you could possibly advocate, well, that's even more of a reason to stay because I don't want to see it deteriorate, which is what happened. So these are all things that our viewers need to understand is extremely limited to military and their spouses and their families, and it's a very big burden for them to bear, especially in the aftermath, because when someone dies or is hurt, that carries for forever. So it really opens up a wound that we have a hard time managing. Whereas as far as other people concerned, Iraq or Africa, it's just not an issue for them, but it remains one for us. So we can appreciate your thought process because it's very similar to ours, Michelle.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure in Afghanistan you made friends and they had families. And that was something that, was the same with Brian. We talk about friends and families, and, it's in Legos over there. And knowing that with the fall of it, probably the men he knew that were friends of his were killed, and who knows what happened to their families, and that's heartbreaking, and that's,
It
we
is,
can't just
and that's
only
part of it.
focus on ourselves.
So yeah, you're right. I'd like to know, from a wife's standpoint, did you feel that the Army, and we Army we call it casualty assistance officer, do you feel that you were well served by them, knowing that everything that a special forces group does is way better than conventional Army? So with
Yeah,
that
so
caveat, how would you explain your experience with them, being that it's very extremely traumatic, but how did you feel that
no,
went?
my casualty assistance officer was phenomenal, and like you said, everything though through USASOC, special operations, it's going to be, a step or 10 above. I would even have the general call me and make sure I was being taken care of. So, and in the aftermath, go through it with me and see if there was any improvements that could be made. And they pulled the CAOs, for special operations widows from the special ops community, and have them personally serve us. And they're told to serve us the way they would want their wives to be served in that situation. So, really, there's nothing I can think of as far as the CAO, uh, that could be done better. Fortunately, he was, I mean, anything I requested, including I wanted a tour of the White House. Somehow he managed to get me a private tour of the White House with,
Incredible.
the presidential football. So, I mean, yeah, it was ridiculous how good of a job he did.
Yeah. And is there any aspect of that that you think needs to be worked on? Maybe, for example, my personal thing that I've noticed is afterwards, I wish we would put Gold Star mothers and family members, kids whose parents are served, more at the forefront events. So at every event, we ask, is there a Gold Star in attendance? Please stand up, be recognized. Do you feel like there's anything, whether on the Army side or military side or civilian side, that you would like to see to better honor your sacrifices?
I mean, I think you're right there with at least like, hey, we want to recognize gold stars, because it's like we become that thing, that scary, shameful thing that they don't want anybody thinking about or seeing or being aware of. I mean, I had no idea what Gold Star meant. I had no idea there were any really among our community up until I was part of the Gold Star crowd. And then it's like, oh, there's actually a lot of us. And it's just, they're like this big silent group that nobody recognizes. I mean, yes, there's lots of ways that we are recognized, but if you're talking about being invited to an event and then being recognized, that's a little different. A lot of times they just want to, everybody wants to move into the good time and they don't want to discuss us. Like, I went to a family event at First Group a few years ago, and at the end they start singing the Ballad of the Green Beret, and of course I'm one of the guys. Of course, are full attention singing it, and me, I'm completely wrecked, and I'm trying to watch it, and then I'm noticing like I'm the only like female like spouse standing there who's even aware of like these words and the reality of living them. So
A
that
bit of
was
a
pretty,
disconnect there, you felt.
yeah, and no one was aware that I was Gold Star either.
Yep. Yep. Well, l- let's just get into a little bit the actual trauma grieving process. You know, it's my understanding that you were supported very well and emotionally by your husband Ryan's family. Did you want to get into that a little bit, because I know the your father-in-law is also an ex-marine or retired marine?
Yeah, so Karen and Henry, were a huge help. Um, yeah, I mean, I was always close with Brian's parents, so that helped a lot. His dad was a former Marine officer, and obviously his mom was military spouse, like I was. So they just picked right up. whether it was Henry helping me kind of look through all the paperwork and all the interviews and whatever, if I had any questions, because he used to run investigations into deaths and whatever in the Marines. So it was great because I could say, hey, what does this mean? What does that mean? As far as the final brief we received, which was like this huge redacted report that was, I think 500 pages or something ridiculous, and redacted like huge, names pulled out.
Chunks.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of it, it was like,
Whole
they use,
acronyms.
oh yeah, oh yeah, and they would use like two or three different acronyms referring to a specific officer just to throw you off, because then it'd be like, well, who's the, like forward African whatever, this and that, and versus the north this that and that, and my father-in-law would be like, well, let's look up what each term means, and he goes, okay, these are basically the same thing, so it's all the same guy, so just go throughout the brief and write the name on that, so he was super helpful with all of these technical details within my research as I went through. And then, as I'm writing, Karen was a teacher for years, and I happened to have two kids that were in the age range that she taught. So as I was writing the book, she could take over, especially during 2020 when school shut down. She pretty much took over all my teaching of the kids when the kids were at home. And so then I could drop them off at her house. Henry would do sports with them and PE. She'd do the teaching. And then I would spend all day writing because I had a very narrow time frame to get my book turned in. I had about 6 months to write the entire manuscript. So, yeah, no, they were incredibly helpful.
And if you felt comfortable, what as a Gold Star wife, help us understand the impact that it creates on the children. What has it meant for them being so young, and now as they're growing up and can drive, and at least one of them can vote, I think. Maybe he can't drink, but he can vote.
Yeah, unfortunately,
What?
he's getting to a dangerous age.
Right. Um, explain so that not necessarily have to get too personal, but just explain that. What does that mean? What does that look like for someone that's grieving a family member who died serving this country?
You know, it's so hard because they were so young. So my youngest doesn't really have much in the way of memories. He was 9. So he doesn't really remember his dad, like glimpses, but pure personality, what he would say, who he was. So that's really tough. But it's like they were old enough to know and understand what a big loss it was, and to know who they lost when it all happened, and for it to really impact them. But they were young enough to kind of not understand the full ramifications. So yeah, my oldest Ezekiel, he remembers a lot more. He was 11, and he just 11. I think you tend to remember more about your parents as you get into those teenage years. Um, but yeah, what that's kind of meant is, I mean, anything from me teaching them to shave to discussing girls with them, and just a lot of these things where it's a whole lot. It's a lot, and you can surround yourself with as many people as you want to help support you, but in the end, you go home at night, the kids are going through it, and in the end, it's still just you, and that's what I realized. Like, my in-laws are great and they're doing everything they can, but even with that, like, I have no support at the end of the day. So it's me having to figure it out. So that meant I actually went and got a emotional support dog who would sleep with them and
Oh,
things
that's
like
nice.
that. So, and that
Yeah.
helped. They all built like a big bed on the floor, and they slept on the floor with that dog for like 2 years. So, it helped.
Well, something that I'm on lucky enough to be part of the North Carolina Institute of Medicine, a task force for Western North Carolina, and we're looking at doing things for veterans, and it's an incredible opportunity. And one things that I am really trying to push for is a mentorship program. If I've been out of the military 5, 10 years, let me link up with someone who just came out that may be showing some signs of adjustment or struggling, or even not, just to keep them on the right path. I think, have you ever thought of, or do you think it would be valuable in some way to do that same type of mentorship program, either as another Gold Star wife, or ways that maybe a male or a female could help mentor the children, male or female, of their surviving? Do you think that that might be useful or productive?
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a nonprofit. I'm sure you've heard of Wear Blue, Run to Remember. And what a lot of people don't know is it's not just running. If you join as a gold star, and I know Lisa, who started it, she's just out of first group, just down the way from them. And so we were going there for a long time until we moved a little further away. But they would pair a mentor, a military member from JBLM, to come over, and they'd be assigned to your kid for that year, and you could request them each following year. And my kids have stayed friends with them and built these relationships, and that's huge. Really is neat. And a lot of times the guys would be like, "Hey, bring them on base, and we'll take them to, like, look at this or look at that, and show them around." So it's really a neat thing, and it definitely helps.
My goal is to try to make it from nonprofit to something that's government institute, more related. I really need to see this as a continuing function of taking care of the soldiers, knowing that if I die, I don't. The nonprofits are absolutely amazing, but I think this needs to also be coming from the institution, so that if I pass away, I know that the actual institution is already has a stake in maintaining, the best quality of life that my surviving children and spouse can have. But I'm so happy to hear that that's been a positive experience for your boys, and I'm sure for you too.
I think one thing that would be a huge positive, if they could make it an automatic functioning of the survivors, if the government did, is that you would automatically receive mental health support and counseling. But they don't do that. I think I was sent to the VA, and they didn't really have that much room for us, and they didn't have any way to deal with a kid on the spectrum, and we were just kind of like squeezed in here and there. And I finally just went, I'm done, because this is impossible to get in. And that kind of blew my mind. I mean, I know they're overwhelmed with veterans, but they also make it very clear that if you do go there, then those services are being clogged up now by you, and then the veterans have less access. So then, you know what I mean? It's this thing where I don't understand how the insurance for the military is actually pretty vast, and it does a really good job. When I think about all the things they covered for Zeke with therapies for his autism, right? But they just can't seem to get in the game with mental health, not on the level they need to be. And it's not just gold stars, it's veterans. It starts and is most obvious with veteran community. But when you think about what me and my kids went through, including my kids seeing an ISIS propaganda video of their dad's death, and they can't provide mental health support for us, that's unreal, you know?
I'm so thankful to have these conversations, because these are the things that we really have to know, and that on a national level, we can advocate for. This is exactly what we're here to do. It's these nuances that, unless we talk to a person that has been through an experience, even though we've been through our own experiences of death and bearing, we just don't know these things. So these are, I'm going to love to follow up with you on these and see, some of the ways that these can be addressed, because they're kind of no brainers.
Mm-hmm.
And yet here we are having this discussion. And, my organization that I'm a part of works very close with the Asheville VA. And the Asheville VA, to my knowledge, is the only dual 5-star rated hospital in the entire state, meaning that's rated on the 2 scales. And it's literally the only one. But even the Asheville VA is not ready to service people like you because it takes quite a team to do it. And so I can understand that at a regular hospital, but there's got to be discussion about at least one per state or regional, or now that we can do things remote. You're right. There has to be a way that you and the family can get the right coverage, and the VA does it cheaper and far better than anybody else. But they just have to be honed in to what the problem is, and if they don't have the right team, it's just not going to be effective. And that seems like what you experienced. And I think at the national level, we can really look at doing something about that.
Yeah. And I think I was just surprised that, you know, you lose your spouse, your kids lose their dad. And while they've got all these other things set, the CAO and notification, all these things that are just so important to them, but they don't instantly provide that. They don't instantly provide any sort of mental health support. And you're at a point where you are so exhausted and you can't remember anything and you're barely functioning. So to go and seek those things out for yourself just feel next to impossible. And so the
It's
few
one more
times
task that you have to
yeah, the
do.
few times I did, I just was so overwhelmed with them saying things like, I took Zeke in right after he saw the video of his dad, and I said, "My son is on the spectrum. He just saw this at school. We need to handle this." And the response was, "Well, we can't fit you in until next Tuesday." And I was like, "Oh, okay. We're not going to make it back next Tuesday because I can't even keep dates in my head." At that point, I can't remember anything. The kids are missing school. I can't remember what time it starts anymore. I mean, my whole mind was just fractured. And so to think that they didn't already have a system set up where maybe a counselor comes to the house every day or once a week, something kind of blew my mind.
And it does mine. And I'll tell you, these things hurt just as much because we've had, geez, I've had one soldier that died with a baby just born before he left. We let him stay back a week or two, and he never returned home. And so just to think of how much anguish continues after the death, we really do have to do a better job of seeking a way to mediate as much as we can. And you're making some incredibly poignant and important points that are troubling that they haven't already been addressed. And we do so good at doing the front end of it. I just don't understand why we haven't done the back end. But this is something that we'll definitely look at improving and understanding. Why is it, and what can we do to make it better? Because I think with just a few changes, we can do it. Even if we centralize it and have outreach come from central office, there's got to be someone that can pick up a phone or get on remote and talk to you that knows exactly what you're going through, because
Mhm.
they were there too.
Yeah, I actually found it interesting. I would go, it was like the first Thursday of every month, they would have a Gold Star Widow support group on base. And what they would do is you'd show up, but the rule was, because I asked them, I said, why don't you do this once a week instead of every other, like first Thursday of every month, because that's hard to remember. And the reason they only had it the first Thursday of every month is because the military required them to have a professional um, counselor there.
Counselor? No.
Yeah. And if they weren't there, then you couldn't have a group. So even if all of us widows say we just need to spend time together, kind of do like, a group support, we weren't allowed to do that in the SOS office without a counselor present because it broke some rule.
Well, that makes an interesting point. Did you find that some of your own healing came from other Gold Star wives or family members kind of like doing what we've done here, brothers and sisters, is just see what works and make a nonprofit about it. Did you find that some of your own healing or adjustment came just from your own interactions of feeling these friction points, as we call them, within the services? And did you find anything to be beneficial from that?
Yeah, so I actually, when I first went to that group or that meeting, I met one other gal, and then we just started meeting once or twice a week by ourselves at a different location because we noticed that it made such a big difference. Just going through something with somebody else who it's all the same pain, and so I found particularly with military widows, because I had my in-laws, but it's a different loss when it's a kid versus a spouse. It's a different, you react differently. And so when I actually moved out from North Carolina to Washington State to be near my in-laws, so then I started a Gold Star Widow support group in my local area. And we then were allowed to meet at the SOS as long as we didn't call it a support group and as long as we didn't advertise it through their channels. So I just started a Facebook page. And that made a world of difference. And we're all still good friends. And, it really, yeah, the healing was incredible. Just being able to share our stories and then on top of it, share what we're going through in those experiences and get our kids together. And then our kids had other kids who had lost their dads and they didn't feel so, like they didn't feel,
Isolated or, yeah,
yeah,
unique. Yeah. Um, Originally, Brian received a Bronze Star. Is that right?
yes,
And a few years later, that was upgraded to a Silver Star, correct?
yes.
That event, was it, how did you, if you feel comfortable talking about it, how did that make you feel? Is it kind of bringing it back up, some resentment about that it shouldn't have been done in the first place, or what was that? Because I know for us and me, sometimes these things can be that you're happy to see somebody receive the honor that they deserve, but it brings up some other resentments and some other pain. How do you mind sharing how that was for you?
Yeah, it was really hard. It was a constant fight. The military pushed back against it the whole way. What happened was initially one of the men killed was given a silver star, and everybody else was given a bronze star or less. But the reality is, I mean, there wasn't more or less that anybody did. It was more like they just randomly gave them out that way. And a lot of times when I look at the investigation and what they were trying to do, I think they just didn't want to give a lot of medals and highly recognize a team that they were also trying to simultaneously blame, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think was the motivation initially. And then they got a lot of pressure from that documentary and gave upgrades to everybody else, but they just didn't upgrade Brian's. Not because he did less, not because he did, anybody did more. It just was. All I could think is maybe it's because he died first. Um, like there was no reason behind it, and we have a 45 minute, I think it's 30 minute, 45 minute video, headcam video that shows the whole incident, and it's clear like the heroism of each man. So we continued to push for them to upgrade it, and finally they announced, oh, we found new footage, which they didn't. They just reviewed what they'd had for years, and finally decided, well, yeah, I guess we'll upgrade his as well. So they did a whole thing, and so I mean that's great. His parents are ecstatic, and I'm trying to be as happy as I can about that. I honestly know that he wouldn't care what medal he had. For me, it's more just that insult of pretending that it wasn't just, yeah, it comes across as they just think less of him and what he did, and they're just doing this because of pressure.
Right. And that's why only if you've been through these kind of experiences can you understand that it's a very emotionally tricky situation, and people take for granted that it's a great thing, it's awesome, yeah, but it does comes with some emotional strings attached. And thank you for being so candid about that. Also, I know the timeline of his time in the service, and it kind of seems like he went from, you know, probably tab to tab to tab to sacrifice. And kind of as you alluded before, how much time, you know, you guys, they spent together overseas or training. So he basically just kept upgrading, leveling up, powering up until he didn't come home. And I think if people realize that like all these badges and all these qualifications, it's all to do something, but it comes at a high cost of, like I said, I was away for more than my whole service was either in combat or training outside. And so all this time spent, and ultimately he used it to sacrifice, you know, his life for. And so how was that, seeing how much he invested physically and emotionally into his career, while you just had to kind of be at home with the kids because he's so busy?
Yeah, you know, I think for us it was good because I was so busy with the kids. Having a kid on the autism spectrum, I remember just saying to him all the time because he would tell me like, "Oh, this is going to cost this much time. I'm going to be gone a lot. Like, are you good with this?" And I was so busy with the kids that I thought it's actually a perfect time to do it. If this makes you happy, if this is what you want, that's fine. Because while I didn't like him being gone, I didn't have to worry about anybody else because there were just so many things going on with Ezekiel. There was just always something with the schools, fighting this battle, fighting that battle. And Isaac was easy, but it was a constant battle with the schools when you have a kid with an IEP. Especially the school system where we were living was pretty terrible. And so I just got no help. I had to fight tooth and nail for each inch just to keep Zeke in a regular ed classroom. Not because he wasn't intelligent and capable of being in there, but because he was a very poorly behaved kid and they just didn't want him in there. So they kept trying to stick him in closed classrooms and things like that. So I was so busy fighting those battles, and they were every week, that I think it worked pretty well for us. But when I realized once he died, he was killed overseas. I was like, oh, we're not going to get that big chunk of time on the tail end where the kids are now at that age, because that's what was supposed to happen. He was supposed to do that deployment and one more, and then he was going to get out. And then by then the kids would have been like 12 and 14, and they're at that ideal age to just start doing family time, family vacations. Zeke was just starting to kind of become a little bit more under control and independent when Brian was killed. And I was like, okay, he's going to be okay. He's going to be able to control himself completely and not have behavioral issues. And that's when Brian was killed. And so then it was like, oh, okay, we don't get that. And that's when you look at all that time you lost and it matters more than it did in the moment, you know?
Excellent way to describe it. Thank you. The sacrifice had its place at the moment, but it becomes because there's an unwritten bond and understanding that then there will be a time where you can cash in and finally get your husband and the family back. And that's why I was kind of bringing to light the fact that it's work, 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 school, 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 deployment, deployment. And that was because of his sacrifice that was not able to come. And I want you to know that it's it's understood about how intense the training and the sacrifices that you have to do to keep a family together, and also the amount of grace that you showed Brian to allow him to do his work, because we need to have peace at home and know that someone is a caregiver at home. And if I didn't have that, it would have made my missions overseas so much worse. So, as as a military spouse, please understand that the grace you showed him is really something that needs to be modeled by others. And it just goes to kind of illustrate who you are as a person. And I think your advocacy for your children is also another one. And I can see kind of that same fight in you to write what the Army had done, to mischaracterize what you'd been through and what Brian had been through. I see that same fight kind of with the kids, and I guess that's just who you are. And we're all lucky to have you in our lives, so to speak, because you brought to light a story of betrayal that should have never happened. And I think that had this not been so publicly known, I think that this could have slipped through the cracks, and you would have had to bear this alone, and possibly not with the outcome that you've had today. So I want you to know how many people you've impacted through your books and your outreach.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, is there anything in a kind of a post-traumatic growth? We are who we are because of our past experiences, and they send us off in certain directions. But at the same time, I just don't want to be a combat veteran, and I want to have other parts of my life. And part of my post-traumatic growth was being able to let go of some of the past and forgive myself and others of some of the past, so that I can be more productive moving forward. Which, if we think about it, and it's hard for veterans to realize that, that's a really good way of honoring those that we're hurting for. And it's like counterproductive that we're kind of beating ourselves up over things that, if they could look down on us and tell us, like, dude, you got to get over it. Like, it hurts them more to see us unhappy than it does to see us happy. So I'm at a point in my life where I can start to enjoy things that without feeling of that guilt. And so, where are you on a post-traumatic growth as a spouse?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting because even just the last few years, it's been a huge growth and change, and it's had to be very intentional because I was living in the story and in the aftermath and under the definition of military widow. And I've had to come full circle and tell myself that that's not who I am. That's something that happened to me. And, you know, Brian's moved on. I mean, he not by choice, obviously, but at some point I have to quit living in this space, where I feel like I'm in many ways trying to please everybody and be what I'm supposed to be, and like the widow definition, and I'm supposed to be this warrior for Brian. And at what point am I going to be a warrior for me and do what's right to support myself? And with my kids getting older, one obviously took off to the Marines on me, and I've got one who's going to take off to college next year. And then that's it. So um, I have to quit living in this space where I'm worrying about everybody else. And I don't need to worry about, well, how would Brian feel about this anymore? Because he's not here. And I think he would tell me, what do you think? What do you want to do? Like, it's your life, you know? And yeah, that's a hard place to be and to move forward from, because I think we do. Like, military widows get caught up the same way veterans get caught up, and it's this identity that we take on, but that's not us. That's something we've lived for X amount of time, and we have to learn to set that aside and then just move forward as ourselves. And if someone says, hey, are you a vet? Or, oh, aren't you, the gal whose husband, oh yeah, but anyway, I'm this now.
I think, regardless The way I see, and this is just my 2 cents about your legacy, is was never really about just the sacrifice, but was about the advocacy that you did and the honor that you did by stepping up against so much adversity. And so I think for me, looking at you, I've always thought of that post traumatic growth as almost the aftermath. That it's not only defined what happened to you, but much more important was it showed who you, Michelle, is as a person. And I can't imagine how proud he would be to see just how much you accomplished and how much you persevered. It would break, our hearts to see anybody not become productive or suffer, but I think your legacy for me is wow. I mean, what an incredibly motivated and determined person. And the why you are motivated and determined isn't now nearly as important in this part of your post traumatic growth as to say, okay, look at how resilient I've been. Look at what I've accomplished. So those are the characters and the traits that you have, regardless of your experiences. And so I would take those capabilities that you have, which I understand you have done and will do because that's who you are. And to me, that's your post traumatic growth is just you being you. Because obviously, no matter what happens to you, you're going to be an advocate. You're going to stand up. You're going to do what's right. And so I think that's to me your legacy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think, yeah, because I have consistently, whether it was with the kids or with Brian, there's always been advocacy there. But I think we do still get caught up in those things. You know what I mean? When there's been something so overarching and definitive, like a big moment, And I think the military, it we get caught up in these niches, and these labels. And I think, just by being as the same thing as being labeled a vet, you get labeled military widow, and then you get chunked into this
Yeah.
group. And so it's easy to lose sight of, wait a minute, like that's not all it is, and that's not all I ever want to be, and that's not all I've ever been. So figuring out how you move forward now and not allow that to just come along, for the ride.
Keep
Um,
dragging on and define you for the rest of your life. And that's, that post traumatic growth is something that we're really trying to push because that's the real sign of how far you've gone from your past. We have to deal with it and comes to grip with it, but we don't have to let it hijack and define our entire lives. And once we've emotionally handled it, you have publicly, rectified what was done. And now we have to get looking forward as to what we're going to do to uh, have the best quality of life for us and our loved ones. And that's exactly what you're expressing now. That the easy thing is to stay in a box and I'm a vet or I'm a widow and that's that. The tough thing is to find new purpose or additional purpose and to take those traits and those character that are positive that got you through that and to apply it to something else. And that's what I see you're doing. And I think that's, a great thing and something that we really try to share with other viewers. So thank you for being such a good example about that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you.
Well, do you have any type of call to action or something that's really in your heart? For me, it's all the Gold Star family members to be more present at events and recognition. Is there something even family related with your children or anything else? Any kind of call to action that you would like to bring to our attention?
One thing that I like to remind people, because I've done these big things. I've written a book. I've whatever. The reality is, what I always thought, and the way I viewed myself before even writing the book was, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom. I'm not a trained journalist. I'm not an investigator, and I would fight against these same thoughts with advocating for Ezekiel. And I think young moms especially go through this. Um, you just feel so untrained, and the reality is you'll come up against entire school systems, and they'll tell you they're the professional, and a lot of times we are tempted to just like, okay, we're going to bow down to that, this person's the professional. And whether it's your child, that professional, you're the professional of that child. And in the end, like, if your gut is telling you something's off, you're probably right. The professionals aren't. You're probably right. And you have to stick with that, and you have to fight, and it's going to be a pain, but it's going to be worth it. My son went from being in special ed classes to pretty much overcoming his autism, getting losing his diagnosis, and now he's a Marine. Um, Same with when the whole thing went down with the military and they lied to me, and I just knew it was wrong. And everyone told me I couldn't do what I wanted to do. Well, I didn't listen to everybody, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I figured it out. And I know that if I can figure it out, anybody can. So I think my call to action would just be that when you know something's off, trust your gut and do it anyway, because I think we all end up in situations like that every now and again, at least once in our lives, where everything's going sideways and our gut is telling us that we know what's reality. But it's really hard to ignore the professionals, but you have to.
And not feel overshadowed. Well, I love that message because we'd say basically in the military, and as veterans, we'd say, well, as veterans, we'd say, self advocate, whether it's your VA, but in this position, as you're saying, mothers, children's, family members. And in the military, then we say self rescue. No one's coming. And so thank you for, empowering everyone out there who might feel, insignificant compared to a system, whether it's the Army or school board. You showing the courage, like, you have to take care of your own destiny. Well, Michelle, our time has come to an end. It's been such an honor and a privilege, and I've learned so much, and I have so many things that I will follow up with you afterwards. It's been, thank you so much for your time, and as always, to our guests, the last word.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of just gave it there. No,
Well, that's fine.
thank you
That's
all for
fine.
having me. I
There you
really
go.
enjoyed
That's
getting to
fine.
sit down and talk. So
That's fine. All right, friends. Well, until the next episode, take care.